Hello everybody and those French players. Welcome to today's episode. We'll investigate all together typical French patterns and chunks. Every opening is those recurrent and important patterns, ideas that you must get yourself familiar with to be able to find good moves when you're out of book. We need memorization in chess when you study openings, obviously, but equally importantly, understanding the middle game plans, recurrent ideas, and patterns are crucial that you can use as a guideline when you're making a decision on your own. This you can orient yourself and still find the good moves even though you don't memorize moves. Okay, the first part was the Sicilian defense. Now we are moving to the French defense, folks, and here it's black to move. Can you please tell me, looking at this French pawn structure, what is the correct plan for black? Now we'll investigate so many nice positional themes in the French defense that will improve your understanding of those structures, folks. Yes, you're a great player if you looked at your bishop on b7 and you created the plan of knight c7, preparing the correct exchange bishop a6. It's a very recurrent French motif. The bishop, light square bishop, being a very poor piece, as you can see here, it's just blocked by the own pawns on d5 and e6, and the bishop has no business. In fact, this bishop is a good bishop, that's a bad bishop, so it's a very logical move. In fact, knight e7, preparing bishop a6 trade. So after bishop d2, we go bishop a6, offer the bishop trade, improve our bishop, and we take it from there, right? That's a very typical French motif that I'm sure most of you are already familiar with, and this is a great start of learning and understanding your openings, right? Correct exchanges, pawn breaks, middle game ideas, endgame motifs, those recurrent chunks and patterns, folks. I'm sure that will be very useful for you to make good decisions. Let's look at this game. e4, e6, the French defense, d4, d5, and the advanced variation. So this is one of the, of course, most challenging things that white can throw at us, folks. And obviously we go c5, a typical French pawn break, and we want to play on the queen side and challenge the center. In this game, Beliavsky is choosing this setup with bishop d7, folks. Can you tell me already what's the point of the move bishop d7? That's not one of the most typical lines. In fact, this is sort of going against the principles, you might say, right? Why is black playing with their bishop while their pieces are sleeping still? But there's a very clear and logical plan behind this move, actually. And after bishop e2, can you tell me, please, what should black do, folks? Obviously, we go bishop b5, and we force the trade of our bad bishop for white's good bishop. Black claims that this operation is so logical and so strong for black that it's worth spending 2 full tempo in the opening for it, right? Just look at this. As I said, this is actually a very illogical looking, unprincipled looking move, bishop b7, but that's a great trade for black. That is all worth it, right? The position is sort of closed. Our king is in the center, but there's no way for white to punish us directly, right? So we can take some time, go for the trade, and in fact, the game continues like this, takes, and then of course, white will castle short, then you take on e2, and already here, if I ask you one more question, folks, maybe some of those French players has intuition about this move. It's black to play, and the hint is this. This pawn on e5, folks, that's a strength in the middle game for white, right? Because it limits our knight, our king is in the center, it supports white's attack on the king side. Although, having said that, it was a great thing that we traded off their large square bishop, right? Because there could be some Greek gift motifs if that bishop remained on the board, okay? But even so, this pawn on e5 is a limiting factor for our pieces in the middle game, and our king could be unsafe. So given this orientation phase, can you tell me one logical move for black in this position that was played by great Beliavsky? Yes, you're a great player, folks. If you came up with the move queen a6, black offers a queen trade in this position. In fact, white should not have accepted it, probably kept the queens on the board like this, but in the actual game, they took on a6, and look at this, right? The mission accomplished. Black obtained a slightly better endgame. I will tell you exactly why later on. A typical French endgame, that his king is totally safe in the center of the board. This e5 pawn was a strength in the middle game, But in the endgames, that pawn is a weakness for white. That's overextended on e5. That will tie down the white pieces, and guarding those, our king will be very secure in the center of the board. And a typical, right, motifs like minority attack on the queen side and so on. We will create targets. We will activate our pieces on the c file. And black also is a good bishop versus white's bad bishop, right? We have to talk to our pieces to understand deeply our openings. Now, what is a good piece? What is a bad piece? All these things are very important patterns for you to get the better in your openings. So this is a desirable endgame for black. More on this later on in this episode. Talking about piece traits, folks, it's black to play in this position. That's a very instructive position here. I want you to take a step back, stop the video, and again, engage in such a strategic operation for black. There's a very instructive operation that is typical for French structures. Take your time. Folks, that's a game of great Ulf Andersson with the black pieces. And the correct move, the correct plan is knight b8. Black wants to trade off white's good knight for their knight. That knight on d4 is a great piece for white. A very typical French motif that you must know, right? That's an outpost on d4. That knight also supports moves like f5. And it's the only piece that is left in the black's camp that can challenge that strong knight on d4, right? No pawn can challenge that piece. No rook can challenge that piece. The bishop cannot challenge that piece. So that's your last piece that can challenge that knight on d4. And black is going for this operation. I will show you how it unfolds in the actual game. Knight c6, right? This was all our whole point basically. And after c3, you can take, for example, you can go bishop d7. Yes, white is a better bishop in this position still, but since the knight disappeared, black has no big problems in this position. In fact, Ulf Andersson went on to equalize and had an okay position very, very soon in this position. Just takes, takes, takes. And black basically had no problems securing a draw in this position. Now, the instructive part is this. Maybe some of you came up with the plan knight c5 takes the bishop on d3. But that will be a strategic inaccuracy because white can actually ask you to take that bishop. And if you take that bishop, you're left with a very typical good knight versus bad bishop endgame that French players should generally avoid. That's your terrible bishop, and you left white with an amazingly strong knight on d4. This will be suffering, and this is a pattern that you must avoid as black, basically. I mean, I can even show you some moves just to show you how it goes. Rook c8, b5, and the bishop is completely locked in. They will play a4 to limit the piece even more, and no one can chase away that knight on d4, and you're gonna suffer for a long, long time in this position. So this is a pattern that you must also know as French players, despite the fact that, hey, I'm gonna win that good bishop, right? It's important to see what is left on the board after those trades, right? What is left is your bad bishop versus amazing knight. So please compare this knight c5 move, folks, in this initial position to the move knight b8, right? There's a big difference between this plan and this idea. That's exactly how great strategic player Ulf Andersson played and chased away that knight and obtained an equal French ending. I will show you exactly what I mean by this endgame. Bishop with the white pieces. How would you evaluate this position actually, guys? If I ask you, is it white or black you would rather take in a practical game? It's a very nice pattern to remember as French players, folks. That's our bad bishop, and this is a bad version for black. And I will show you exactly why. This bishop has no prospects, and the knight survives. White is a knight on f3, which is a long-term problem for us. It's not easy for us to trade that knight. Plus, the knight on f5 looks good, but it can be chased away with moves like this, and you're always facing a potentially troublesome good knight versus bad bishop endgame. Okay, just to very briefly show you how Grishuk played b4. It's a very nice move. He wants to go b5 and limit the bishop on d7 even more. He gains space on the queen side, right? If they go a6, you go a4, of course. And after takes, you will take back with this guy. And again, right, this bishop really suffers. You don't want to end up in a position like this. This knight will be chased away, as I mentioned. It's not fun to play this position with black at all. So after b5, they tried to create counterplay with f6 in this position. But look how Grishuk treated this position. As I said, I can always take your knight at some point, achieving a good knight versus bad bishop scenario. Black doesn't accept it, but then comes a4, and look how the bishop on d7 is suffering. Beautiful move. He doesn't go for liquidation. He keeps the rook's on the board. Why? Because this rook has no entry square of the c file. My king and bishop cuts down your rook completely, and he's keeping one pair of rooks on the board because white is playing for a win in its position. He will create a second front on the king side, g4, g5, right? Every French schoolboy should know such typical endgames and know what to avoid in general in the French structures. I will show you how Grishuk won this game, guys. It's a beautiful, beautiful endgame. Knight f5 is a bad move, and now comes the correct exchange. And as I said, good knight versus bad bishop scenario happens on the board. f4 was much stronger just to stabilize the knight directly, but Grishuk went knight h3. White is always going to keep the advantage in those positions, right? Rook gets active. I mean, look at the bishop on d7, right? It's a terrible piece. So white is pressing, They are trying to find a way forward, and in the end, they do find a way forward by the move f4, stabilizing the knight, and the rook is suffering. Comes rook h1. Just to very briefly show you guys how this looks like. I mean, it's just the suffering, yeah? In this position, rook a8, probing black, attacking a target, attacking the point of f7, of course, and now comes the final phase. Now I can take, and I go knight f7, and after king c7, do I take or do I do this? You tell me. Yes, I do this, and black resign because they're helpless against this, and I win. If I'm careless and take the pawn, then I allow bishop takes b5. Oopsie daisy, and then the pawn is queening. The pawn is running. So you see, you can play the most amazing strategic game in your life, and you can spoil everything with a single blunder, knight takes a6, because then you allow this. That's why chess is one of the most cruel games out there. A single slip can cost you any position. But of course, Grishuk is a strong grandmaster. He's a scientist. He looks at the opponent's strong moves. Instead of chasing off the random pawns, knight d6 stops bishop b5, stops bishop b8, allows king h5, and the game is completely finished. Now you saw the Grishuk endgame. It's the same endgame with a slight difference. There's a bishop on e7 instead of the bishop on d7, right? Remember, in the initial position it was the same position. Black had a light square bishop. Now black has a dark square bishop. And you tell me, folks, would this favor black or white? Yes, this would favor black. I'll rotate the board. We'll look at from a black's perspective. The bishop is a strong piece, right? That's your good bishop in its position. Plus, the bishop can later target the weak pawn on d4, thus tying down the white pieces. And it won't be limited by the pawn chain b5 and a4. The bishop on d7 had 0 life in the Grishuk game. Here, black is completely fine in its position. That's an equal endgame for black, right? Now we've seen all these motifs, guys, endgame motifs. I'm sure this position will be easier for you to do. It's black to play in this position. Those French players, we are searching for a good exchange operation for black. Exchange operation for black. What would you do in this position? You tell me. You stop the video. You look deeper. You try to find the essence in this position. And please tell me the move that is solving your strategic problems in this position. You're a great player if you came up with the move bishop b5 and not knight b5. There's a big difference between these two moves, guys, right? There's a big difference. Bishop b5. Forcefully trading off your bad bishop in its position. That's exactly how the game went, and black won this amazingly beautiful French endgame in the end. He also exchanged the knights, then he allowed this position, and we'll look at this endgame later on. That's a beautiful and typical French endgame on the board, and black won this. If you go back to this initial position, guys, after knight d4, if you didn't play bishop b5 but knight b5, you tell me what white will do. That's a big positional mistake, actually. Strategic mistake for black. Yes, guys, you're allowing white to, again, transition into a good knight versus bad bishop scenario. You want to avoid this. That's what we learned in this episode, right? It's suffering because the bishop has no targets. The knight is excellent on d4. They will have all the cards in this position. They will put so many questions on us in this position. That's truly a terrible bishop. You don't want to end up in a position like this with black. So there's a giant difference between bishop b5 and knight b5 in this position. Hopefully it was easier for you to understand that, hey, by going bishop b5, you can really force the trade of your bad French bishop. And now this ties to this beautiful French motifs of good French endings. That's exactly what we'll study now in the final segment of this video, folks. Look, black has the typical semi-open c-file, just like in the Sicilian defense. There is actually some similarities between Sicilian and French defense, guys, namely the potential for a minority attack and also the c-file pressure and the weak pawn on c2 in those positions. Okay, just keep that in mind. They can actually have similarities, those structures actually. And here black takes his time. Black challenges the strong knight on d4, and there is no way for white to keep that knight on d4 anymore. And look, white transitions into the pure rook ending, which is actually going to favor black. And we will actually discuss the reasons why in this position. Why do you think this endgame is better for black? Black will ask all the questions to white. It will be difficult to hold this in a practical game. All those French schoolboys, you must be doing like this when you reach an endgame like this. That's what you're playing for. You want to strategically outmaneuver those people in those endgames. You will show your strategic understanding, because French ultimately is a very strategic opening. Petrosian, Botvinnik, all these strategic geniuses took that opening with the black pieces, right? You go b5 and you basically start your minority attack. You want to freeze that weakness on c2. You want to gain more ground with b4. So black plays very nicely and logically. Well, if white wants to stop b4 with the push b4, what's the problem? What is the drawback of this move, folks? Yes, the drawback is that now there is less control on the square c4, and the rook gets active, puts pressure here, the rook can go here. You see, white has no targets. White has 0 targets in this position. Look at our beautiful pawn chain. We have 0 weaknesses in this position, and we are the ones who are asking all the questions. Rook a6, activity, and here comes f6. Typical French pawn break, guys. By the way, more on that later on in the second episode of this video. I will talk about pawn breaks for you. f6, of course, is designed to improve your king. Exchange, do you think we should take that rook or we should return? Please evaluate this trade. Black keeps the rooks on the board because our rook is much more active than the white counterpart, right? Because if you take on d4, you're only helping the white rook, right? You don't want to exchange like this. It's a beautiful idea as well for black. Just returns back the rook to c8, and the game plays itself. Now the king gets active. The king has potential to go to f5 and so on, and just a beautiful position. Again, improve the rook, paralyze the white pieces. Just look at the white rooks and compare them with their black counterparts. That's what I mean by strategic opening, positional opening, because you're playing with beautiful pieces and long-term grinds. You want to play those endgames, nice endgames with 0 counterplay for white. And of course, now your king gets active. If they want to stop king e4, then you allow the exchange, rook e4. That's a beautiful move, because if they take, the king becomes a giant, and look at those pieces. They can't hold this position anymore. After rook e4, they tried king d3. The problem is that now you can take, and you tell me the next move. How can my king gain further ground in this position? Yes, one more pawn break, and now my king gets active, and I have this beautiful d4 idea on the board, which means your king has to drop back, and my king gets further ground. You see where it's going from here, basically. I will show you the rest of the moves quickly, just to tell you that this is a winning endgame for black, and white's just suffering. Black found a nice way to queen the pawn, and also every pawn, all the pawns are controlled. There's no way for white to create any counterplay. My king is very, very close to your pawns. Those pawns are not dangerous, and white player resigned in this position. That's a beautiful French endgame, and this also connects, guys, right? If you go back to that critical moment of knight d4, you also understand now you're forming connections, right? From the middle game to the end game, you're forming connections. This way of learning material, by deeply engaging with material, by asking the why questions, and also understanding the general philosophy of the opening, is the way to make further progress and long-lasting progress in deeply understanding your openings. Guys, I must show you some model games in the French defense to consolidate our knowledge. Studying such model games are a crucial way forward for you to have deeper understanding of your openings. Annotated master games is even better. If you find those games annotated by the masters, it's even better. But I will do my best to annotate and guide you in this beautiful journey. Spassky versus Viktor Korchnoi, candidates tournament match in 1978. Korchnoi won this match against Spassky, and he won it because of his beautiful French defense. It starts with d4e6 and transposes to a French defense. Viktor Korchnoi was a great French player. You can learn tremendously from his games as French players. I recommend to study his games by heart, folks. c5, c3, advanced French. We talked about this a little bit in today's video, so it will be nice consolidation. Bishop d7, already hinting at the ensuing plan. I will show you exactly what I mean. Takes, knight f5. Korchnoi moves the knight and puts pressure on the pawn on d4. That's a very typical French team, of course, right? By hitting the pawn on d4, we want to tie down the white pieces. That usually favors black in those structures. Knight c2 to guard b4, and Viktor in his position goes directly to b4 and offer a trade of those minor pieces. And Spassky chooses a very interesting idea, knight e3 in this position. He welcomes a trade on e3 and Korchnoi accepts it. And now we go for this interesting looking structure that looks unorthodox perhaps, but that also will tie nicely to our episode here, folks. Bear with me. Bishop b7, a3, knight c6. We are coming to a crucial part of this middle game early on. Korchnoi doesn't castle the king too early because maybe it will allow some attack on the king side, right? He doesn't show his cards yet. He does go knight a7. Can you tell me, folks, what can be the point behind the move knight a7? Now you're getting better at French motifs. You must understand the reason why great Viktor played the move knight a7. Yes, if they castle short, what's our next move? Yes, we want to trade off our bad French bishop, right? That's exactly why after knight a7, Spassky goes a4 because Spassky anticipates black's plan of bishop b5 and see what great Viktor does. So like a pendulum, Viktor Korchnoi goes back to c6 and hit the pawn on b4. After bishop d2 comes another French motif. He now goes a5, folks. He wants to fix the structure on the queen side. He asks white to go b5 and now he gains the square b4. You see how positional he's treating this one? It's a beautiful strategic maneuvering going on the queen side. At the end of this whole operation, yes, the bishop sucks. That's true, right? White managed to keep our bishop really terrible, but black gained the b4 outpost when it turned. It's always give and take in chess. There are always trade-offs. So this was the whole point of great Viktor to get a knight on b4 in this structure. Now Spassky castles. Of course, if you take the knight, then you allow me to capture back with the pawn, creating a pass pawn plus, right, activating my rook, hitting your backward pawn on a4. You don't want to end up in this position as white, right? So he castles short, Viktor castles short as well. It won't be easy at all for white to create an attack against the king on g8, right? It's just impossible. Also, this bishop is a really, really bad piece for white in this structure. So you might say these bishops are equally bad, right? That's actually a very interesting imbalance. Queen e1, Korchnoi anticipates queen g3, so he just plays a prophylactic king h8. So after queen g3, Korchnoi plays a typical French move f6 in this position, and Spassky didn't take the pawn on f6. My question is this: how would you recapture if they took on f6? What would be your reaction as black in this position, folks? Is it rook takes, bishop takes, or g takes? You have three choices. I love such multiple choice positional tests. And the answer is, of course, g takes f6, because this way you limit the knight, you fight for the central square on e5, plus you have this rook g8 idea on the cards, right? So rook c1 and rook g8, and black is totally fine in this position. This was the whole point of great Viktor. By playing f6, right, you're challenging that important pawn in the center, and you want to open the g file for your pieces. This was the whole idea behind this. Plus, he also wants to activate his bad bishop, right? It's a multi-purpose French idea, guys, in this case. f6, rook c1. Now my question is this: should black take on e5, or should black wait with this exchange? What would you say? Another positional puzzle for you folks. Well, taking on e5 would be a terrible mistake, folks. Look at this. You're giving this e5 outpost to white for no reason. That's another motif that every French schoolboy must know, right? You should not give up e5 outpost field like this. This will be a chess crime to take on e5 and give this outpost on e5 to white pieces. They are so happy to see this move, and you don't want to end up in a position like this. That's exactly why great Viktor played the move f5, and he completely removed the possibility of even taking on e5, and now he sets the structure and plays this structure. Okay, that's a very interesting idea. You might say 2 moves ago maybe it would be better for black to push f5 directly, right? But he says, fine, maybe I lost one full tempo, but the game is still quiet and slow. Things are very locked up, so a single tempo is not so crucial, according to Viktor Korchnoi. h4, rook c8. He slowly wants to challenge the only open file in this position. After h5, there's an exchange, and there comes knight e2. Here, Viktor is sort of poking for a draw, goes back. If white accepts a draw, it will be fine because he was already ahead in the match, right? But Spassky plays for more. He plays queen h3. White wants to go ambitiously with the move g4 now. They want to create some lines, open lines on the king side, but Korchnoi is a great counter-attacking player, and he finds the move bishop e8. And you see, one of the ideas now is to activate the bishop on that diagonal. Another very typical French motif, guys. Yeah, the bishop has no prospects here, so future might be lying on this diagonal instead for your bishop. King f2, queen b6. He slowly wants to get the pieces to the queen side, and also after g4 comes a very interesting moment, folks. White wants to maybe take on f5, maybe they want to go g5 at some point. So great Viktor Korchnoi finds the move g5 in this position. A beautiful move because he's stopping white from pushing g5 themselves, and if they ever take on g6, which they did, he recaptured with the bishop on g6. This poor bishop on d7 now has potential, as you can see. See how he's activating his bishop. See how he's treating his poor bishop in this position. His king is still very safe. There is no way for white pieces to attack the white king, and everything is well protected for black. After g5, I want you to stop the video here, folks, and please find great multi-purpose move that was found by great Viktor Korchnoi, folks. It's a pawn move that activates several black pieces and also weakens the king on f2. That's a big prompt. I'm sure you found the move f4, guys. That's a beautiful move. The bishop, the terrible French bishop, became the king of the board. The rook gets active, and after takes, the king is suffering as well, not on that diagonal, right? Just look what a multifunctional pawn sacrifice this is. That's how strong players play chess, folks. That's a beautiful move, f4. And here after f4, he goes to c2 with the knight, because now everything is about to collapse. I'm attacking your rook, I'm attacking your d4 pawn, and after rook d1, well, now comes my question, folks. Please blunder check. Can black take on d4, or would that be a blunder? Can you please properly blunder check this move? Knight takes d4. Folks, blunder check, please. Knight takes d4 doesn't work because of, you tell me, bishop e3, and you're running into a pin on that diagonal, and now everything is attacked. This knight is hit 3 times, but only a single protector, so bishop c5 is not solving your problems, and white is ending up with an extra piece in his position. This was the trap set by the move rook d1, and you're a great player if you avoided knight takes d4. You can lose any chess position with a single slip. That's why Viktor played the Viktor move, a human move, bishop e4. His idea very simple. I want to take on f3 at some point and remove the guard of the pawn on d4. The bishop became a very active piece on this spot. Bishop e3 was Spassky's move in the actual game, and here Viktor takes on e3. The king looks stable at first sight, but Viktor says, you know what? No. Think again, because queen c7, and now the king is so exposed on e3. Again, just look at the black pieces, right? Just look at the piece activity for black in this position. Every single piece is doing something, and white pieces are really on the back foot. The king is not safe at all. Yes, white's an extra pawn, but who cares? That's actually practically very difficult to play with white in this position. Spassky is fighting well. He's basically going for a pawn hunt on e6 just to, you know, divert black's attention for the moment. But Viktor finds this beautiful move, bishop a3. Now the idea is very simple. Bishop c1 check, followed by take on f4, and your king is not safe. Again, as I said, every piece is doing something for black in this position. extra pawn is meaningless for white in this position. And in fact, after takes, bishop c1 check, king f1, take on f4. If you take a step back, look at this. Now my rook get active, bishop, bishop. The queen is also joining the attack. Queen c4. Here comes my final question. Exchange operation, please, guys. The art of exchanging pieces. Should black exchange the queens or should black keep them on the board? Do you remember the fundamental question when it comes to the queen trade, folks? You tell me. Yeah, whose king is safer? That's a fundamental question. Well, compare the king's safety, please. The black king is much more secure than the white king, so no queen trade. So can you guess Viktor Korchnoi's move that intensified the attack against the white king? Where should we place our queen to have attacking chances on the king's side? You're a great player if you found the move queen g7, and now a very simple idea that the queen is coming to h6 and will organize an attack against the poor white king on f2. Amazingly beautiful finish is coming, guys. Queen h6 is on the board. There are so many threats that are facing the white king. And after queen c3, the game continuation, well, the sealed move in the game was bishop d2, a beautiful move, utilizing the pin on the f-file, hitting the queen, plus introducing ideas like queen e3 check, but also queen h4 check or queen h2 check. White is completely helpless against all these threats. In fact, white resigned without waiting for the next day, so to speak. And we can look at some lines. For example, queen b3 will be answered by queen h4 check. There are many other moves, of course. Rook g3, bishop e1 check. Look at this. And I'm winning an exchange by force. It's not only an exchange because the entire thing is collapsing after bishop h5. The king is not safe. Knight is pinned. You see the problems, right? Black is completely destroying white in this position. So it was right that Spassky resigned in that position, folks. And it's a homework position. I will show you a beautiful game between Timman and Kamsky. We have the very typical French pawn formation. And to awaken the knight on d7, black found the beautiful move g5 because I'm destroying your pawn chain. If you take on g5, then my knight improves. I'm always welcoming this trade, which is this, trading of your good knight for my bad bishop. And after takes, knight takes e5. After rook e1, here comes my question. Should black trade on f3 or should black drop back the knight to g6? That's your homework question that will tie down to what you've seen in today's episode, that will consolidate what you learned, and this will tie to our next episode on French patterns, episode 2. There are more things to come, folks. I will talk about typical pawn breaks, king safety issues, positional pawn sacrifices. There are so many things yet to come when it comes to investigating this nice opening, the French defense. Again, I hope you got your lessons. That's the way to study deeply your openings. Look at those recurrent patterns, important patterns that you can use as a great guideline when you're on your own. When you don't memorize the moves, which at some point you will not, because no one is a machine, you need those patterns in your mind that you can use to generate good moves. That's a function of this series, and I hope you're enjoying it. Please give me feedback. Maybe you can tell me some model games that you know by heart, some other ideas that I missed. I'm waiting for your answers on the YouTube. Please give me a like and subscribe if you like this video. That's very important for me to be able to produce similar content, folks. I'm here to help you improve your game.